This video is a question to you. In anticipation of Star Citizen 4.0 and the first new star system to ever be introduced to Star Citizen, I want to know what makes the gameplay in Pyro truly different for you. Is it the minimal services? Was it supposed to be those solar flares, or is it just the lack of law? Do you need to see completely different missions? How about the same missions but in a different looking environment? If you're hearing the same voice lines at space stations, does that ruin the whole thing?
Yeah, I feel that.
Today I want to explore what could make Pyro a truly different star system from Stanton, and what I've noticed so far that makes it feel that way in my last few weeks playing in the update. Thank you for coming to my Tomato Talk. I know many of you don't really care about Pyro because you don't want to go there. Maybe you think it's a lawless PvP environment with nothing for you. Maybe you think it's a useless expansion to a game that doesn't have game systems that work yet. But I'd like you to consider that there are a lot of ramifications of Pyro itself. From its economy and the trade routes it creates going back into Stanton, to the fact that it will attract a lot of the bad actors of Stanton over to a different system. The overall quality of the Pyro System addition is something we should all still care about, even if we're not going to use it directly. For the rest of you, what does it take for Pyro's various locations to feel truly different from their Stanton counterparts? When you visit an outpost, do these new full-sized settlements speak differently to you? A mixture of unaffiliated, gang-controlled, and more civil locations dot the system across the 6 different planets and 5 different moons. Well, not including Pyro 5, which is just a green gas giant, which actually has Pyro 4 in its orbit. It's a slowly degrading orbit, so someday it'll fall into the gas giant, but for now it makes for some amazing visuals. It is our first planet with rings, and you can actually see another planet from it. It's fairly unique in that regard, and on top of that you can actually see Pyro 5's moons in orbit from the surface, which all could very well have players out there doing their own thing too. It has nothing to do with the video, I just think it's cool. But these outposts, apart from being themed differently, are also just more fully featured, with more NPCs, more underground areas, sometimes cave expansions, harvestables to collect, and more things to do, including local missions to each area that you can get in your Mobiglass. There are crawl spaces, engineering terminals controlling power, and satellite locations in the surrounding spaces on the planet, anywhere from 1 to 5 kilometers distant from the main hub. You can already see early signs of the points of interest development plan they laid out back at CitizenCon. These outside locations also host NPCs going about their day in various places, and seem to be separate offshoot locations from the main one that you can go visit for various needs, when the game is running well enough. And when the game is running well enough and you can get a bit immersed, the actual feeling around these outposts is pretty unique. Depending on the setting, from the detailed environments to the properly themed NPCs actually walking around doing things, and the amazing vistas and backdrops, it's hard not to feel like you're in a space-themed Wild West frontier movie. All of this, of course, supported by Pedro Camacho's amazing soundtrack. These locations are joined by space stations and asteroid facilities as the only real civilized places in this new system. Other than that, it's a void. There are no landing zones. In fact, the original expected landing zone in Pyro, known as Ruin Station, is just like the other space stations, so support here is few and far between. Pyro is about 1.5 times bigger than Stanton, but it has a small fraction of the space stations. With many of them being controlled by gangs you can piss off, you can absolutely find yourself feeling stranded and desperate out there. During one of my streams, I was about out of options with a damaged ship, and while engineering would have allowed us to make repairs ourselves, it was an exciting moment at the time to feel truly in the deep end in Star Citizen. For the most part though, I am still unsure how Reputation is working in this update. It's been a mystery since it was supposedly updated in 3.23, and I would say a lot of what can make Pyro feel different, the factions, depends on that. Because Pyro isn't necessarily lawless, it's just not the official government who's enforcing their rules. But you can explore many of the current space stations and find the contested zones. These are the actual truly lawless central areas meant to act as packaged dungeons in Star Citizen. They are not instanced and anybody can enter at any time, but they offer a vast array of hallways, puzzles, and rooms to move through with your friends confronted by NPCs, grabbing loot, and figuring out a puzzle that spans multiple space stations. They are incredibly fun when the game is running well, but is this different enough gameplay to make Pyro distinct from Stanton? What if something similar was created in Stanton, maybe in the depths of Grimhex or something like that? Would it still be unique to Pyro because it's all out there in the open, or would Pyro lose its novelty with this style of gameplay? Is that enough to set it apart? The planets of Pyro are quite different from Stanton's planets in their biomes, their colors, and as I mentioned before, their sounds. It's truly an experience to just stand on these planets and soak in the ambiance. Just like it was when we first did so in 3.0 7 years ago, almost to the day actually, and probably just like it will be on Nyx. New planets are nice to visit when they arrive, but aren't they just different versions of Stanton's planets? Yes, the clouds are looking much better, but all planets are getting updates in their clouds. The caves indeed are getting an update, so rock and acid caves match the sand caves we've had, but those also are transferable. The solar bursts were delayed out of 4.0 and will probably come in the next update, which would have made the trips around the system and across the planets a much more perilous journey. And that removes a lot of the danger of Pyro. So aside from these outposts and the things we've experienced at them, what do you need to see from the planet to feel truly different? Does that part even matter to you? Returning to those locations, which you may start at some remote sites but ultimately will centralize around a hub of activity, you're going to find local missions that I mentioned before. This is entirely new to Star Citizen. These are only missions that you get when you show up at a very specific geographic location and have objectives that require you to stick around that location. While one form of this mission requires repairing components using the engineering system, that won't be coming in a later patch, we still do have some other local missions. And other missions will also bring you to these remote locations. I genuinely believe over time, each of these settlements we're seeing is going to become a place where players can log on and off, stop off for a few days on their travels, or make their home and run missions non-stop. With the module system they're working on for missions and the location development tools they're building for Starchitect, I believe if they meet their goals, they'll be able to spawn countless fetch quests, cave clearing missions, and other small MMO tasks for players to experience similar types of gameplays in vastly different settings across different star systems. But for now, these missions are mostly still just shoot person A and not person B and get paid. You're still getting your missions from the Mobiglass, and for the most part, it still feels like you're shooting the same folks just in different armor, being commanded by different people. And some of this is definitely because the AI is not performant enough to have become distinct, but there's no denying that the contracts at some point will become repetitive, and it's really going to depend on a lot of the smaller things to differentiate each situation. And that's not to say they are all combat missions either. While what repair missions could come into the patch still aren't confirmed at the time of this writing, I've seen several investigation missions popping up as well. But no matter what changes, you'll always be tied to the same gameplay systems whether you're in one system or the other, whether it's mining, salvage, shooting, or finding somebody. I point this out because I want to pose the same question to you: what makes this gameplay truly different? You'll see a lot of discussion in the coming weeks and months of, isn't this just Red Stanton, and was this all worth the wait? And while, like I said earlier, no matter your view of Pyro will all benefit from its inclusion, it's why I think everyone should stop and think, is there any one thing that actually separates Pyro from Stanton for you, or a combination of them that makes the experience actually different? Was it the settlements you found, the factions controlling them and giving you the rite of passage to use them, the mouth-frothing insane nature of the people you're finding across the star system, or the difficult journey they put you on in order to get to the good stuff? My experience in Star Citizen 4.0 playing in Pyro has actually been incredibly fun, but it's had its rough moments. While much of it has been hampered by lag, broken elevators, and falling through the surface of planets, my later journeys, particularly last week, were quite a good time. See, in Stanton, when you come across somebody, you're of course nervous what they might do. The relatively safe system that is Stanton still doesn't have adequate security, and the law system will slap them with a crime stat in certain situations, which can ultimately land you in jail for a few hours. But that doesn't really do much for people, and there's not much value in items you might lose, or in the money you might pay when you die just yet, so the risk isn't very high. But see, in Pyro, none of that matters. Every person you see is going to always be a calculation you have to run on how to approach. That goes for landing at outposts, loading up cargo at a space station, or touring the canyons of a moon. More often than not, I was left alone, and the ship you're in can definitely make a difference on that, but I did find myself to be the target several times I was out there. There was one sequence that started with me and Avocado getting attacked by a Keltless Black in my MSR. We eventually turned the tide of the battle on them, chased them down, and killed them, but almost immediately we were stealth attacked by an F8 that had been stalking us during the battle. They chased us out of atmosphere, but as we were fleeing, they were attacked by a Hammerhead, distracting them long enough for us to get away on our escape to Pyro 5. Throughout the rest of the day, we were forced to jump from planet to planet, station to station, trying to find a friendly service to repair and refuel at. While I think my reputation was glitched, causing everybody to shoot at us, I couldn't help but feel it probably isn't too difficult to find yourself in a similar situation. And that's the difference that matters with Pyro: reputation. No matter where we go or what we do, the deciding currency and progression in this game, as far as I'm concerned, is reputation. We'll see if they can find a way to sneak crafting into this game mechanic, but as of right now, it's one of the core standalone pillars of the game. It defines which missions you'll get, which factions you'll work with, the shop discounts you might get, the rewards you can receive, whether or not you can actually go to a location, what guns or blueprints you might have access to in a store, or what parts of a space station you can access. If credits are God, then reputation is Jesus, and he's watching. Now, as of right now, as I said earlier, it's hard to tell whether or not it's working correctly at this point. The implementation of it's been pretty rough, and in theory it sounds great, but in practice so far it hasn't worked well. And this is a big part of why Star Citizen is so frustrating. The Stanton system shouldn't feel that lawless, and until security starts to work at Stanton, I do think Pyro will actually feel kind of similar, just because that stark contrast isn't quite there yet. So while it's not going to be incredibly different when it comes to reputation and security right now, we gotta watch what CIG is going to do with these two systems. Because within the next several updates, this could all change, and the template is there with Pyro. They just need to get these systems functioning within it. Now, I still don't have the whole view of what's actually going on in this system. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be testing a lot of this on my own streams and trying to get more answers for you guys, so consider subscribing here and keep an eye out for findings. I might post a video next month. Besides that though, I've had a fun time in the system, looting locations, running through space station contested zones for various forms of loot, and finding ways to infiltrate asteroid facilities. You, of course, can also find mining, salvage, investigation, and cargo running missions out here. There are also the sandbox opportunities in those same categories as well, with a full economic discrepancy between Stanton and Pyro that allows for proper shipping routes between the two. That on its own, the inclusion of economic imbalance due to supply and demand differences in different systems is enough for some people. And knowing you can mine for a certain mineral in Pyro that doesn't show up in Stanton and is more valuable could also be all you're looking for. But ultimately, the difference between the two systems is going to come from a lot of these underlying systems we've talked about today and how they're used in the gameplay we're taking part in the future. But there are also things I'm just generally curious about too. Will we see bounty hunting missions that start in Stanton and then send you to Pyro? Will players who might feel safe in their territory in Pyro need to watch out for those NPC and player bounty hunters after them? How will the solar flares affect ship and item systems? And what more opportunities are being offered for those with more exploration focus on their mind? Because I know Pyro has a reputation of being only for PvP, but it's definitely not. Even with AI not filling the roles they should here, many players are interested in the frontier aspect of Pyro, not just the killing and shooting. And when AI are up to the task, you're going to see citizens for prosperity and headhunters and other gang members flying around and walking around these outposts, making people aren't breaking their own rules. But until CIG gives us better voice comms to interact and communicate with those around us, I think we're going to be stuck playing out similar scenarios of what you might still find back in Stanton. At the end of the day, everybody has a different opinion on what makes each planet or star system distinct, and how it's communicated. Whether it's through locations, biomes, factions, rules, available missions, or reputation. Sometimes all it takes in a system is a unique hero location that simply unlocks a wealth of already available gameplay in one place for a specific type of person. You just never know. For us, Pyro is a nice addition, but it's good to remember this weight and 4.0 as a whole is about server meshing. Server meshing makes more star systems easier, but Pyro wasn't a requirement and was not the source of this weight. Also good to remember that while Pyro might be an annoyance right now and not that different from Stanton, they are building for a game much down the line in the future. And if reputation and security can do what they want it to do in this game, Pyro could truly be an anomaly of a system that's actually interesting for all kinds of players to visit every once in a while. This all being said, I'd love to hear what you hope to experience in Pyro when it does finally come out. And if you're avoiding it now, maybe if you plan to avoid it at all times during this game, or just right now when the other systems aren't ready to make it viable. And if you are looking for more content like this, consider subscribing to the channel for regular updates on the game, and check out my second channel for more long-form content, podcasts, and stream clips. And if you'd like to see more of my Pyro gameplay published, I do have a gameplay channel, Space Tomato Plays, you can check out, which is also linked down below. I hope you learned something new in this video, and I'll catch you in the next.